Hi scholars, happy Monday. You should have your new packet that we picked up last week. It's that big one separated into two parts. You're going to get the first part out now. We're going to get to page 8 for ELA. It is May 4th. It's going to be your very first ELA portion. On the very front, we have a little chart that has all your classes and then the page numbers for each day so you know exactly where to look. We're going to be doing Unit 8, Chapter 8 today. Your name is Luther. But for right now, I just want to go over our week and some things before we begin. Going over our week in review, today and tomorrow there's going to be a video of us reading Chapter 8 and then tomorrow Chapter 9. On Wednesday and Thursday, you're going to be reading Chapter 10 on your own, but I split it up to a Part 1 and a Part 2, so you're going to want to make sure you follow the packet. On Wednesday, you're going to be doing some independent note taking. And on Thursday, you're going to be doing some independent note taking, and there's an SPO to wrap up Chapter 10. And then on Friday, we're going to have our Unit 8 assessment. We're already wrapping up this unit on Edulastic. So we're wrapping up our Native Americans unit this week. Chapter 8 today, Chapter 9 tomorrow. You'll be working on Chapter 10 on your own Wednesday and Thursday, and then we'll be taking our tests on Friday. Before we begin, some things to go over. Make sure that you have finished your Navajo Code Breakers test that's on Edulastic. A lot of scholars are asking me about where the reader is for it. Our reader is always in the video description beneath this. If you still haven't found your reader, you apparently haven't been doing great on your packets for the last few weeks because you've needed your reader for all of your notes. You shouldn't just be listening along, you should be reading along. So even though we don't have the paper copy like this one, there's a digital copy in the description of this video right down below where you can read it alongside your test and then your notes as well. Next up, make sure you have your packet open to page 8 to read along. And I wanted to take a moment to talk about our Grow Our Team value of this week, which is mission. Mission is when we're showing some kind of goal and we have a mission to complete. Our mission is for all of you scholars to be college ready and to go to college one day. So we're showing that mission by right now. Our school is still open and we're still giving you guys a quality education and you're still preparing yourself for 6th grade, which is the next step in completing your mission to go to college. On page 8 in your packet, I want us to look at our objective for the day and then our big question. Our objective first, I can analyze and note the differences between points of view regarding the expression assimilation through education. So we're going to talk about the differences and people's points of view and people's opinions on the expression assimilation through education. Assimilation is a new vocab word we'll talk about in a moment. Take a moment to see if you can think of any parts of it you recognize. Think of assimilation. What word sounds like it's in there? And then our big question, the thing we're going to try and answer, how did events in Luther's life affect his view of assimilation? So what things in his life gave him a specific opinion on assimilation? Let's take a moment then to look at our vocab beneath and then look at the definition of assimilation. Our vocabulary. So assimilation is a noun. It's the process of becoming a part of a society or culture. The verb version is to assimilate. So think of assimilate. It sounds like same or simile in the middle. It's when you're becoming the same as other things. You're kind of melding or becoming normal. So think of towards the beginning of the class, the school year, you're still used to the summer. You're not really used to school yet or back in that routine. But as time goes on, you assimilate back into a routine and you remember what we have to do, how we do things differently at school. In this culture, they believe that Native Americans should assimilate into the Europeans coming over into their culture and their society. So they thought that we're building this United States, these Native Americans should assimilate and become like us and give up their old culture. Next up is a cavalry. Cavalry is a part of an army of soldiers on horseback. So these would be mounted soldiers on horseback. They would usually have something with long range like a spear or a bow. Next up is a verb, sympathized. If you have sympathy for someone, it means you're empathetic. It means that you can feel or express concern to support someone or something. So if you have a friend that's really upset and you go over there and you pat them on the back and you talk to them about it, you're showing sympathy. It means you can feel what they're feeling or you feel that you should help someone else out. So when you're expressing concern or you're trying to help or support someone. Experimental, think of like experiment in science class. It's when you use a new or different way of thinking or doing something. So if you do an experiment in science class, you're doing something new or different and you're tracking your results. You're going to do an experiment using a new technique and then you're going to record down what's different about it. And lastly is heritage. Heritage is the tradition and beliefs that are unique to a specific group and handed down from generation to generation. So the Native Americans have a very large heritage. That means they have a lot of traditions and beliefs. Every one of you, no matter what, always has a heritage. The people you are from, your ancestors, your history, we all have traditions or beliefs that are unique and that they get passed down from generation to generation. So from grandfathers to fathers to sons to your children maybe one day. So, for example, Mr. Sheeline is German and Irish, so I have traditions and beliefs that go back with those cultures and those societies for generations even before me that I've learned through my ancestors. Make sure you have your digital reader open. It's in the description beneath this video. And then you're going to scroll down in the reader to page 68. It's called Your Name is Luther. So you're not looking for the little page numbers at the top of the file. You're looking at the corner of the page, page 68, for Your Name is Luther. You need to make sure your digital reader is open so you can follow along with me, and you're going to need it to complete your notes to send to me in 1 moment. I'm going to give scholars 1 moment to get there. It starts with Richard Henry Pratt. Starting at the top of page 68, if you still need a moment, pause the video to catch up. Richard Henry Pratt is not a famous name, but his story does provide an important window into Native American history. Through Pratt's story, we learn there are people in the United States who did not want to see Native Americans killed off or trapped on poor reservations. Some wanted to help Native Americans assimilate and become part of a rapidly changing nation. In the end, Pratt's efforts did not help in the way he had hoped. This is his story. So this is about multiple men. The first one is Richard Henry Pratt, who wasn't like a lot of other people at the time and wanted to just kill off Native Americans and get them out of the way. He wanted to include them and save them from this kind of misery. So he's one of the few people that actually tried to help. Pratt was not of a Native American, but he was born to a family of British descent in New York State. In 1850, at 10 years old, his family moved west to Indiana, which was a frontier state at that time. Needing money, Pratt's father followed the gold rush to California. He got lucky and struck gold. Unfortunately, he died before he could bring that gold home. So remember, at that time, a lot of people were going to the west and the frontier to go for this gold rush and for the Homestead Act. Pratt's father did the same, but he died. As a result, at age 13, Pratt was fatherless and penniless. As the oldest child, he had no choice but to leave school and work in order to provide for his family. He grew up understanding the importance of hard work, as well as the value of knowing a trade or skill that would provide an income. Later, during the Civil War, he volunteered for the Indiana Volunteer Cavalry and fought for the Union. He was a good soldier, smart, brave, and hardworking. Pratt liked military life, and he stayed with the cavalry until the war was over. He was assigned to the 10th Cavalry Regiment, or the Buffalo Soldiers as they were known. Their job was to make sure the Lakota and other tribes stayed on their reservations. So this was a part of the military whose job was to go around reservations and basically patrol and make sure Native Americans did not leave them. This was easier said than done. The land on most reservations was very poor, so people could not farm there. The U.S. government promised to provide fuel, money, and food and other supplies to the reservations, but there never was enough for anyone, for everyone. Many people preferred to die fighting than to starve on the reservations. As a result, the 10th Cavalry was involved in several of many Indian wars between the United States and the Great Plains tribes. Although Pratt was employed to control and even fight Native Americans, he also saw firsthand how horrible living conditions were on the reservations. He understood why people would rather fight than surrender. Pratt sympathized with the Native Americans, and he thought there must be a better alternative to war and starvation. So, one of the reasons he sympathized or expressed concern and wanted to support these people was he saw how terrible it was in the first place. He saw how little our government was doing to help them, and he saw how other men were treating them in the 10th Cavalry. They would rather fight and kill these men than try and help them. Picking up. In the Army, Pratt had contact with Native American prisoners of wars. The army was not sure what to do with these prisoners because they didn't know if because they knew that if they released them, they probably would have to fight them again. Pratt tried to figure out how to enable the prisoners to return to a life of peace rather than remain in prison or die in battle. He believed Native Americans needed to be taught how to live according to the laws and customs of the United States. He taught them to speak English and he taught them to read and write. What Pratt realized is that Native Americans were just like him. Well, yeah, they're people as well. They wanted to be able to take care of their families, their homes, and their land. They wanted food, shelter, and safety. Like everyone does. They're not that different. They cared for their children and wanted the best for them. Pratt believed in order to have these things, it'd be best if Native Americans learned how to read and write English and were more familiar with U.S. ways and customs. A custom is like a belief or tradition. Pratt had a favorite saying, kill the Indian to save the man. This did not mean he wanted to literally kill Native Americans. He actually wanted to save their lives. But in order to do that, he believed it was necessary, flipping the page, he believed it was necessary to strip away everything that made them Native American. His goal was assimilation through education. As he saw it, Native American culture was the main problem, and the solution to that problem was to replace that culture with something new. So he believed if you're going to kill the Native Americans, spare the man, kill the parts of that person that is Native American so that there's whatever's left over to them, take away all their beliefs and customs and traditions. We'll give them new ones. That way we can save their life, which it may save their life, but you're killing that person that they were. So think of the person you are today and think if someone took away your family, everything you know and care about and like, and they say, here's your new life now. Here's all the things you should care about. You're still alive, but it's not the same life anymore. You're changing that person, and this is without their permission. So you're just forcibly changing these people. Today, it is no surprise that many people blame Pratt for trying to destroy what was left of Native American culture. In many ways, that's exactly what he wanted to do. He thought that if he could kill the culture, he could save the people's lives, but a lot of these people would rather have died than give up their culture and have it destroyed. Pratt gathered support for his idea and eventually convinced Congress to give him money to open up an experimental school. The U.S. Army agreed to let him use an old barracks in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Pratt converted the building there into the Carlisle Indian Industrial School. At this school, Native Americans would learn to speak, read, and write in English. They would also learn about U.S. history and customs, such as Thanksgiving and 4th of July. They would no longer be allowed to dress like Native Americans and were instead made to wear uniforms. They were not allowed to sing, dance, or tell their old stories either. They would be taught to cast aside their ancient ways and learn a new way to live in America. To find students for his new school, Pratt went back to the same reservation lands where he once fought as a soldier in South Dakota and Nebraska. He talked to some of the tribal leaders and told them he had an idea to help their children find a bright, happy future. This brings us to the story of another colorful, fascinating character in American history, Luther Standing Bear. So, we're going to pause for a moment there before we transition to Luther's story. Think about how he may have saved the lives of these people, but he destroyed their culture. Imagine today if we were to do something similar and think about how much we prioritize our own culture. We love and care about the things that are unique and different about everyone. Imagine if someone came up to you and said that we're going to get rid of all of that. We have to change it so that you can live a normal life. We'll give you new things to like. Here's some new music you like instead. Here's some new clothes you should dress up as. Picking up at the bottom of 70, Luther's story. When Luther was born, he was named Plenty Kill because his parents thought he had the heart of a hunter and a warrior. He was born in the Black Hills of South Dakota in 1868. Back then, many Lakota and other Sioux tribes were still at war with the U.S. Army. Plenty Kill lived on a reservation, but he was raised according to the old traditional ways. He learned to hunt buffalo, ride a horse, and learn to fight. Plenty Kill's father was a great warrior and called the U.S. soldiers, quote, long knives because of the swords carried by officers like Richard Henry Platt. When Plenty Kill was a boy, his father made a bow and arrow for him. The bow and all the arrows were painted red as a sign that his father had been wounded in battle. Plenty Kill grew up expecting that he too would someday fight and possibly die in a battle against the Long Knives. However, his father really did not want his son to become a warrior. Like many other Lakota, he was tired of fighting and said he wanted something different for his son. Then one day, Richard Henry Pratt came to talk to them about the Carlisle School. Pratt told Planikill's father and other tribal leaders to visit the new school. On the trip, they also went to New York City and Washington, D.C. They met the President of the United States, the, quote, grandfather of the long knives. When Planikill's father returned from D.C., he said this: My son, since I have seen all those cities and the way that the long knife people are doing, I begin to realize that our land and our animals are all gone. There is nothing but the long knives everywhere I went. And they keep coming like flies. So we'll have to learn their ways in order that we may be able to live with them. You will have to learn all you can, and I will see that your brother and sisters follow in the path that you are making for them. Someday I want to hear you speak like those long knife people and work like them. So Planikill's father already wanted him to go to this school so that he could become like Americans, like these long knives, so he had a chance at a normal life where he could grow, support himself, have enough money for food and land, and not most likely die in battle like a lot of other Native Americans were doing at the tribe. So think back to our big question. How did events in Luther's life affect his view of assimilation? Events like his father being toured around and seeing the land outside the reservation made him realize, hey, I need to send my son to this school. I don't mind if he gets assimilated. It's going to save his life. Life at the Carlisle School was something totally different than anything Plenikill, now Luther, had ever known, and it certainly was not much fun. So even think back to our book Island of the Blue Dolphins. Towards the end of the book, when she's saved and they bring her to California, they make her give up all of her dresses from the island. She has to wear new clothing. They give her a new English name. They take all these things and give them new ones as well. Just like back during the early 1900s, when a lot of people were immigrating to America at Ellis Island, they would most likely give them new last names that better fit the land rather than a very long German or Irish or some kind of last name from another country in a different language that was hard to say. So, just like that, they took Plenikill and said, no, your name is now Luther. That's a more traditional name. There, he chose his first new name, Luther, at random from a list of boards on the chalkboard. He could not read, but the teacher ordered him to choose the name anywhere, and Luther was the one he chose. So he's just putting his finger all around the board. I don't know what any of this means. I'll just take that name, I guess. Life at the Carlisle School was totally different than anything Plenikill, now Luther, had ever known, and it certainly was not much fun. The teachers forced all the boys to cut their hair, which is something Lakota men never did. The boys were very angry about this, and they didn't understand, but they had no choice. So, Lakota, if you were a man in the Lakota tribe, your hair was very sacred to you. It was a part of your pride as a warrior. So, to go to all these boys and just tell them you have no choice, you have to get rid of it, you're yet again forcing and taking something away from their culture and their tradition to assimilate them and make them the same. Discipline at the school was strict and punishments were severe. If the boys refused, they were punished and had to get a haircut anyway. After their haircuts, the children received new clothing. They had never worn such tight, scratchy garments, and they were very uncomfortable. Aside from the sadness of separation from their family, the worst part was they were not allowed to speak their own language. The children were only allowed to speak English, which was impossible at first because none of them knew that language. Luther was a fast learner, and he began to enjoy reading and writing. Luther was a star student at Carlisle and became a recruiter for the school, meaning he encouraged other Native Americans to send their children there. The people at the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs liked what they saw at the Carlisle School. They built about 25 more Indian boarding schools around the country, all modeled after the Carlisle School and funded by the government. They also encouraged church missions and other organizations to create similar schools on reservations. Unfortunately, few Native American children were as successful as Luther and other members of the first class at the Carlisle School. Most of these schools were run like military bases, and the children were often treated very badly. In some schools, children were treated more like enslaved workers than students. They lived in poor conditions and diseases were widespread. If they tried to run away, they were captured and forced to do physical work as punishment. Pratt himself complained that the schools were hurting rather than helping Native Americans. Eventually, he complained so much he was fired from the Carlisle School. So the man who founded it and had all these original ideas was fired because he was protesting how they were changing the school over time to mistreat Native Americans. He continued to promote the idea of assimilation through education, but he was not very successful, and the schools never improved much. Many were closed by the late 1920s. Luther went on to live a full and fascinating life. Despite efforts by Pratt and teachers at the Carlisle School, Luther never forgot his native language and customs. He never cut his hair again, either, and he did not think any other Native Americans should have to. Luther spent the rest of his life working to preserve Lakota heritage. So, after coming out of the school, he grew his hair back and then he made an effort to preserve and save their heritage and their traditions and beliefs rather than let it all be erased by the government and these schools. He wrote books and gave speeches, and he even became a movie actor. He tried to make sure Hollywood film directors portrayed Native Americans in a fair, honest way instead of always presenting them as villains or savages. So, Mr. Shine really likes westerns, like western movies or video games, like stuff about the Wild West and cowboys. A lot of the time in these old movies or games, though, they'll show Native Americans as like these like evil villains, like they're just going out there to kill and hurt everyone and steal. They're just like very savage and they treat them like animals, when in reality that's not the case. Most of these tribes never came into contact with these people, and this idea of them being villains or savages comes from the idea of we put them on these reservations, they're starving to death, and when they leave the reservation they're trying to go out and find food. People are viewing them more as these wild animals trying to escape and hurt everyone around them. That's also what the government treated them and told people they were, so they could continue to make them seem like the villain, and what the government was doing was right. Luther believed in the importance of education, and he was always grateful for Pratt for the chance to attend his school. So Luther may have disliked the idea of it, but he was still thankful he went to the school because it gave him an education and a chance to succeed in this new world. However, Luther did not agree that Native Americans should abandon their culture. He thought Lakota children should learn about Lakota history and they should be proud of their culture and beliefs. Today, Luther Standing Bear would be happy to see that present day Native Americans are proud of their heritage and have not abandoned their culture. So, just like today, when we try and teach scholars something in school, no one's telling you to give up in your traditions or beliefs. We're just giving you an education. It would be very different. Imagine if you went to a school and they gave you a brand new name. You're not allowed to like any of the same things. The whole point of any education is it should be something to enrich and build upon, and not to replace a part of your personality. This is almost a version. If some of these other schools, they treat it more as like, think of like brainwashing someone or controlling them. We want to convert them from this into that, when instead it should just be about teaching these people, hey, this new world is occurring, whether you like it or not. You should have a fair chance and an education to be able to succeed in it. Next up, we have this one short page of notes. So, we're on the left-hand side, we have Richard Henry Pratt, who was the founder and creator of the school. And on the right, we have Luther Standing Bear. In each category, that we're going to give each of their opinions on the idea of assimilation or the school. So remember, they each had unique points of view that changed what they thought about the school and how well they thought it worked. So the first category, look right there in the middle of the two rows of boxes, experience as a young person that shapes him. So what thing happened when each of these men were young that changed their life? So Richard Henry Pratt, they give us an example. He had to leave school and work in order to provide for his family, because remember, his father died. Take a moment and think on the right, what happened when Luther Standing Bear was young that changed him? When he was very young, before he went to the school? Or why did he go to the school in the first place? What convinced him or his family to send him to the school? The second row, relationship to the Carlisle Indian Industrial School. So, Richard Henry Pratt, how was he related to the school? What did he do for it? And Luther Standing Bear, how is he related to the school? This could be very simple, like did they go to the school? Did they know about the school? Did they work at the school? And lastly, you could put an X in the box for Pratt, but for Luther Standing Bear, what is his reaction to the idea of abandoning Native American culture? Was it a positive reaction? He wanted to get rid of Native American culture? Or did Luther have a negative reaction to abandoning Native American culture? Take a moment, fill in some thoughts, jot them down now. We're looking at the differences, so you have to fill in those 1, 2, 3, 4 boxes. take a look at my notes on here on the right. So, an experience as a young person that shaped Luther Standing Bear. He believed it was important to lead the right, believed it was important to learn to read and write. That mostly came from his father. Remember, who was toured. His father went to Washington D.C., met the president, went to New York, saw how the world had changed. What was the men's relationship to the school? So Pratt started and taught at the Carlisle School. It was his idea in the first place. And Luther, his father sent him there as a student, and he was forced to cut his hair, something the Lakota men never did. And lastly, at the bottom, we didn't have one for Pratt, but for Luther Standing Bear, his reaction to the idea of abandoning Native American culture. He believed in education, but didn't want to lose his culture and belief. Those can be separate. You can still have a culture and belief and still have an education. Education should not override that. Take a moment, fill these in. This is what you're going to submit to me in a few minutes, either via text or email photo. That way I can mark you off on our tracker. I need to see your full set of notes. Lastly, wrapping up for the day, make sure you submit your finished notes like we just talked about. Make sure you sign on to Edulastic and finish that assessment if you haven't. I believe it's closing on Wednesday, so you're running out of time. And make sure that after this, if you have some time, just go ahead and knock out at least 45 minutes of reading iReady or math iReady. Just get one of them done right now. Checking the trackers every week to see who has 130 minutes of both, so we can still give out grower team points for finished and past lessons on iReady. If you have any questions, scholars, make sure you give me a text or a phone call. But in the meantime, I will see you tomorrow when we go over our next chapter. Bye bye, have a good day, and stay safe.